Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about yogic stability. We reach this place through our practice, through entering into the low idle state in the body over and over again, through doing the work of cleansing ourselves through the Om Japa in the chakras. We reach this profound stability inside of ourselves. So I want to talk about that. What does that look like? How some different students have mentioned this to me. Also, a story about Lahiri Mashaya and how this arose in his life, and he explained what was going on inside of him to his students. So let's talk about this stability, how you might notice it inside of yourself as you're going on in your practice. Let's get into it. I like to teach timeline therapy to yogis, especially because every once in a while I find somebody, it really just clicks with them. They start to understand how to work with their subconscious, and they start doing the timeline therapy to themselves. And once you have a little bit of success with that, you start realizing how well this technique works. Then you just go like gangbusters, like let's go at it. What else I got down here to dig up and clean out? So I had a student, this really clicked, and he called me up. He's like, "This is great. This is what I'm doing," and he just kept going and going and going. And then he called me up about 2 or 3 months later, and he goes, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm losing all of my fear of negative emotions. Everything. I'm losing my fear of everything. What is going on?" And I'm like, "Yep, that happened to me. That happened to me. I got the timeline therapy. I just went to town inside of myself, started cleaning up everything and anything that I could find. And I started losing all of my fear of the subconscious." Usually people are a little bit timid. And so you might notice this. You might notice this in somebody. They cannot be in a quiet moment. They got to have the radio. They got to have the TV. They got to have a chatter all the time to drown. Drown what? Their subconscious. They don't want to see what's in there. And they're a little bit timid, a little bit afraid. And it's very normal. It's very normal to be afraid of the ghosts in our own closet. But the timeline therapist and the yogi who does Om Japa, absolutely not afraid. That's where we go, right? That's where we go, and we Om into it, or we do the timeline therapy, and we start digging it out. And pretty soon, it doesn't take that long. Pretty soon, you run out. And that's what this yogi was telling me about. I reached this point. I lost all my fear. What is there to be afraid inside of myself? It's gone. I got over it. I really love when I get a psychiatrist or a psychologist that starts learning this yoga with me. I think they really enjoy this clinical view of yoga that I present. So I have a wonderful psychologist, and she said, something has changed inside of me. She said, I can go through a tough time. I can go through a hard time. I can go through something and I can have a little bit of an emotional response. But she says there's just this huge portion of peace which is always under that. And that little bit of emotional disturbance is just an inch of topsoil on the top of that. And this huge crust of peace is inside of me. So there's this immense amount of peace which is always behind everything. She started to notice, right? So just a little bit of something going on the surface, but it's very much on the surface, and there's this huge amount of peace which is constantly backing her up. Another yogini called me. She said, I was with my husband, and he said something, and what he said, I thought about it, and I thought, this ought to irk me. This ought to rile me up. the way that he said it, it was, I don't know, it was just a moment, and he just said something, and it should have riled me up. And I sat there looking at what he had said in my memory, and there was no response. I couldn't get riled up. She's like, am I pushing down my emotions? Am I trying to be, okay when I'm really not? Am I hiding, and am I doing a spiritual bypass where I'm pretending that these things are okay, but it's really not okay? Am I doing that to myself? And she said, I hunted inside, and I hunted inside, and I hunted inside, and I couldn't find anything. And that's the cleanliness inside of our subconscious that arises naturally over time, over a long period of time. Not a day, not a week, maybe months, maybe years. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect. It does not mean you will never get caught in an emotional entanglement, okay? Because something bigger might come along, and that might rile you up. But then you'll get over that as well. You reach this point where something comes up inside of you and you go, oh, whoa, look what I found. Let's dig this out. And you just dig it right out because you understand the process. You understand how it works, and you know you can get to that peace. So it's a really amazing process. Brother Premamoy liked to tell the monks, he said, when I started out, my life was like this, these big ups and downs, right? And then my life was like this. And it was more moderate, ups and downs. And then my life was like this, smaller, ups and downs. And he said, then my life was like this. And then my life was like this. And that's that bedrock of emotional stability that psychologist Yogini was talking to me about, isn't it? There might be something going on the surface, but behind it there's this huge amount of peace that the yogi is repeatedly coming back to. We come back to the low idle state, we come back to the deep brain, we come back to the bliss, we come back to the expansion. We keep finding that again and again. It creates this bedrock. The left brain, the personality inside of us, stops assuming that we can solve, know, and control everything. That's not going to happen ever. So no matter how smart you are, no matter how great you are, you're never going to solve it all. You're never going to fix it all. You're never going to figure it out, all of it. It just doesn't, it's not set up that way. And you start to rely more and more on the deep brain. And that's where that bedrock comes from. We clean out all the things separating us from that bedrock. That's what creates this yogic stability. Lahiri Mashaya was with his family, and his daughter, one of his daughters, became very, very sick. And he told his wife, yeah, I think you should do this. And the wife didn't do that. She went and got the doctor, and she did what the doctor said. And the daughter got more sick, the daughter got more sick, the daughter passed away. And as the story goes, Lahiri Mashaya, even though his daughter had passed away, he continued to teach from his living room. And so his students came in and they said, Sir, your daughter has passed away. Don't you think you want to go and grieve? Why aren't you grieving? We cannot see you grieving. Why aren't you grieving? Because that's a normal response to grieve. So he did his best to explain this emotional stability where he was at. And he was beyond what I'm talking about, right? He was beyond that. He'd been at that level for quite a while, and now he was trying to explain something even a little more profound, even when it comes to the departure of a loved one. He said, it's not that I haven't reacted, but the reaction which you are used to seeing in somebody is kind of like if you have a ball and you drop this heavy ball into the mud, and that ball makes an impact in the mud, and you see this huge crater inside of the mud. This ball impacted the mud, and you see this huge, huge crater. The impact of something happening stays there for a very long time. And that's the process which you are used to seeing. He said, that process is still there, but there's no more mud inside of me, you see? Instead, it's like the bedrock of the floor inside your house. And when the ball, the heavy ball, falls and hits the stone floor, it does not make a dent. It does not make a crater. It does not make an impact into that bedrock of peace. He said, instead, it merely bounces off. Did it impact? Absolutely. It hit the floor. There was a feeling. There was a reaction. But it was so small, you couldn't see it. It was there. But because of this bedrock of peace, you can't see it. And so you might notice, as you keep going in this yogic practice, that you will go from this to this to this to this to this. It doesn't mean you'll never be angry. It doesn't mean you'll never be upset. It doesn't mean you'll never grieve. None of that. It just means that those instances will get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And so somebody might say something to you and you might emotionally react. And they'll go, "Oh my God, I made you upset." And you're like, "Yeah, I'm over it." They're like, "No, that's impossible. You're hiding it. You're stuffing it down." And you'll go, "No, I was mad and like this." And then I got over it. I let it go because it's not worth it. You get this kind of deep understanding. And in the midterm, things might bother you a little bit, but you'll notice you recover more and more and more quickly. And there's this peace that enters you. There is this reliance on the deep self, reliance on the higher self. You understand, I don't have to fix everything. I don't have to solve everything. I cannot control everything. Therefore, I will just let go and enjoy the ride. And the more that we do that, the more that we rely on the larger portion of our brain, the more we rely on the right brain. The right brain is heavier and bigger. That's everybody, even in those who don't develop it. So imagine what it's like inside of the yogi. You keep developing the right brain. You're using expansion to tap into that right brain. You're developing it. It's getting bigger and heavier in your life, isn't it? So you rely on that more and more. And it becomes more and more reliable for you. So why would you go back? You can't. Why would I go back? It doesn't make any sense. Go back into pain, go back into suffering, go back into misunderstanding. I can't go that way anymore. I've seen too much of the truth, and you rest in that truth inside of yourself. And that's when I know the yogis really embraced the path. They're trusting the process, and that will always lead you in the right direction. So if you want to know more about Om Japa in the chakras, I invite you to go on meditativemellows.com. That's my website. There'll be a link below. You can also join on Patreon if you want to hear me do a very, very long satsang. There's so many satsangs on Patreon right now, so I invite you to come check it out. But if you want to hear more about Om Japa in the chakras, please watch The Big Bliss, because it's a wonderful view of how that works, how to do it deeply and profoundly, and how transformative it can be. It can cause this roll-up of consciousness. That little understanding, this roll-up of consciousness, it's so huge. Oh my goodness. So I hope you love this. If you did, be sure to hit that bell down below so I can see all of you next time.